Hello, welcome to the show. Welcome to Not Just Nintendo, a video game podcast that is about Nintendo. But it's not just Nintendo here at Not Just Nintendo, as I talk about other video games as well. Welcome back, everyone. This is episode 27. Nothing particularly special about 27. You know, it's a multiple of 3, 9, 27, and 1, right? So that's about it. Not really anything else to say about 27. You know, it's September. I guess there's that. It's September. It was not September last episode. You know, these episodes are going by fast now, with them being every 2 weeks. And, I've got to say, for the last few weeks and for the next few weeks, like, I would say actually next, like, month and a half, I'm going to be very busy. School's finally started up. I say finally like I was waiting for it, but no, school's now started up, and marching band's going, and so things are pretty hectic, and will be through, like, the end of October. After October, I think things will calm down a little bit. So, like, starting at the end of October, early November, I think things will be, I think things will be a little bit better. So, that's kind of the chaos that's ensuing as we speak. So if I sound a little frazzled, or if the show has to be recorded in a bunch of different edited together segments, and it seems a little rushed, or the continuity is not totally correct or logical and coherent, I apologize. But I'm still trying my best to make the episodes. I know they're already every other week, so it's kind of sucks that they have to be like shorter and all messed up too. But that's just kind of how things have to be. So. Anyways, this episode we're going to talk about what I've been playing. It's really just one game, I would say. Well, I would say that because it's true. I've only really played one game, other than some, like, Minecraft here and there. So, other than that, though, I've only played, like, one game that I'm going to talk about here. And that game is Kirby the Forgotten Land, Switch 2 edition. So we'll talk about that. That came out on August 28th, so that was over the course of the last, podcast episode. So last time it was not out. Other big things that have come out in this last little bit. I believe the Chronos: The New Dawn came out, if I remember correctly, or if I know correctly. I think that game just came out last week. I'm pretty sure. But anyways, so that was a thing. I haven't really heard a whole lot of people talking about Chronos: The New Dawn. I know when it was announced back at Summer Games Fest, a lot of people were talking about it there, but I don't think it's really gotten a whole lot of buzz, so I'm not really sure about that. And then obviously, Star Wars Outlaws came out on Switch 2, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, I believe. But, Star Wars Outlaws on Switch 2, I was skeptical of it, because I was like, alright, I don't know, because they were the people at Gamescom that played, the Elden Ring demo. Or not demo, demo, right? The Elden Ring Switch 2, like, the Tarnished Edition demo. And from all I've heard, the Elden Ring demo on Switch 2 was abysmal. It was terrible. Garbage. But the Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade demo was great on Switch 2. So, if Elden Ring runs terribly, Final Fantasy VII runs and looks great, it's just going to be one of those things, and I think we're probably going to be dealing with this for the next several years. If a third-party studio decides to put in a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of work on optimization, then a third-party game can look fantastic and run fantastic on the Switch too. But as soon as they just kind of rush it out because the Nintendo audience doesn't really care too much about visuals, or as soon as they, just kind of toss it out there or whatever, it's not going to look super good. It's not going to run super good. And so we've got to be really careful here. Even with a fairly powerful piece of hardware, we've still got to be super careful, which is a little unfortunate. But really, I think this is more on the third parties than it is on Nintendo. I don't think Nintendo's in the wrong here. Their thing is plenty powerful enough to run most things. It just so happens that nobody wants to put in any of the effort to do so. So that kind of sucks. And so Star Wars Outlaws, my point is I've been hearing some varying reports. The other day, I watched like a performance, thing, like people talking about the performance, and it was like gameplay. And I was looking at the gameplay, and I'm like, all right, this looks all right. Like I can tell that it's not as good as the PS5 version and stuff, but Star Wars Outlaws on the Switch 2, it looks all right, right? But then, then just today, or yesterday, I think it was yesterday actually, I read an article talking about how terrible it looks on Switch 2, and how terrible it runs on Switch 2. And so it seems like every other person has a different take, right? It's like some people are like, oh, this is great. Some people are like, oh, not so great. And see, I was trying to gauge the reception so I could determine if it was something I wanted to buy, because I kind of want to play Star Wars Outlaws, And I'd love to do it on Switch too if it's a good version, or if it's a decent enough version. Now, I know some people would have the mentality of like, well, if you've got a PS5, you might as well just play it there. Or if you got PC, you might as well just play it there, right? Even if it's a decent enough version on Switch too. And I do understand that perspective, but I just like collecting and having the most stuff on the Nintendo console, you know? Like, the Nintendo console is always going to be my primary platform. If I can't play it on a Nintendo console, or if it's a really, really bad version, like, really, really bad, then yeah, maybe I'll play it on, like, PS5. But otherwise, if I can help it, and if it seems at least somewhat logical, I'll buy stuff on Switch too, because that's, you know, I like having stuff there. You know, it is interesting, because originally I got an Xbox so I could play third-party stuff, because it ran terribly on Switch, and then I got a PS5 so I could play the PlayStation first-party stuff, but then I realized, oh, well, I guess I can just play third-party stuff here too, because I like the PlayStation interface better. And now I don't need to do either, because now, generally speaking, I can play a lot of the third-party stuff on Switch 2 again. I'm sure that won't last for the entire generation, because eventually, you know, I think Nintendo will probably fall behind again. Or rather, the other two will move ahead power-wise. But anyways, this is a whole thing we don't need to get into. My point is, Star Wars Outlaws, a lot of people are in one camp, a lot of people are in another, and I think it's going to be like this for a lot of third-party games coming out here. Like, Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, I think there's probably going to be some people that say it looks bad. But there's also going to be people that say it looks good, so we'll see what happens. I'm also curious about Elden Ring. I'm not going to buy Elden Ring on Switch 2. I have no interest in doing so. I don't even like the game from the little bit I've played of it. I want to go back to it, and I'll just do it on PS5 because I already own it there. And from what I've heard, it's a significantly better version. Like, it's a huge difference. So I'll probably do, if I ever do go back to Elden Ring, I'll play it there. But yeah, so I might end up picking out Outlaws at some point before the end of the year. Really, I'm already in, like, end of the year mode, you know? It's only September, but I'm in, like, end of the year mode. Like, I've got to finish up a bunch of stuff before the end of the year. And it probably shouldn't be that pressing, because really, at the end of the day, I mean, we've got, you know, we've got a few months still, right? But I'm already, like, trying to, you know, figure out, like, I'm looking at my list of games I've beat so far this year. I'm like, okay, you know, where are things going to go on my end of the year list? I know it's only September, but I'm already thinking about that kind of stuff. And I've got a few things pulled out that I need to finish before the end of the year. A lot of stuff that I'm, like, partway through that I really want to finish before the year's out. And so there's a lot of weird stuff going on here, and I'm frazzled. I'm trying to figure this stuff out. I've got to finish up before the end of the year. You know, I'm at like 35 games, I think, so far this year. I think I'm probably on track to get fewer games than last year, but I'll have played more this year because I'll have, you know, played more time on average per game, because I've played longer games on average. So anyways, so, you know, that's all coming up. We've still got all that. We've still got a little while till some of that stuff. Hopefully we'll have a Nintendo Direct here this week, even. Potentially the day you're seeing this, actually, I guess, potentially. Or if not, it could be the day after, or the day after the day after. Wednesday or Thursday, I could see that happening as well, so... you know, I'm not going to be able to live react to it. It's probably going to be during the school day, so that's unfortunate. But I'll come home and I'll watch it. Maybe I'll even watch it there, to be honest. We'll see. But anyway, so, yeah, the Nintendo Direct, that's going to be exciting. I'm pretty sure that is going to happen. I'm sure there's got to be a Nintendo Direct in September, even if all the leaks are dead wrong about it, and it's not on the day they said, none of the stuff they said is going to be in it is in it. Even if that's all wrong, then I think, at the very least, we'll have a Direct, you know, whatever it ends up being. And I don't think there's going to be a Mario 40th Anniversary Direct. Based on what everyone's saying right now, I agree with the majority of people that it's now going to be at the end of the, or in partway through the regular September Direct. It's not going to have its own standalone thing. I do still think Metroid Prime 4 is getting its own Direct. So I think there's going to be a regular Nintendo Direct probably this week. And then there's going to be and that one's going to have Mario in it as well. And then the next week, there's going to be the Metroid Prime 4 Direct. And I could see at either of those presentations them potentially talking about Metroid Prime 2 and 3, if that's going to happen, the remakes for those. So we'll see what happens. I mean, this is all speculation. I know nothing. Obviously, I have no intel and no info, you know. Me over here with my 563 subscribers getting all the Nintendo info. I'm like basically a leaker, you know. I'm on the phone with Sakurai every day. Honestly, no, I'm all the way up there with, like, you know, Takahashi, right? But anyway, so yeah, that's kind of upcoming stuff, and hopefully next episode I'll be talking about a Nintendo Direct. And who knows, if I have time and there's a lot of good big stuff talked about at the Direct, I might end up making a bonus show over the weekend or something talking about the Direct. We'll see what happens. Don't bet on it, but it might happen. Back to news, though. So I talked about Chronos the New Dawn. I talked about Star Wars Outlaws. A bunch of you are probably punching your monitors right now, or punching your phone if you're listening on your phone, because I did not mention Silksong. I saved that for the end here. And we'll be talking about Silksong more later, because a lot of the news and stuff, as you can imagine, relates to Silksong. That's kind of the biggest thing that happened this week. But yes, Hollow Knight Silksong came out. A lot of people are talking about that. I know most of you guys, if you listen to other podcasts, everyone's probably talking about Silksong, because that's kind of a big deal. As it turns out, right? But I'm not. I'm not talking about Silksong because I didn't play Silksong because I didn't play the original Hollow Knight either. So I need to play. I need to finish up the 2D Metroid games. That's kind of where I'm at. I've just recently played the earlier 2D Metroid games, and so I want to play the more recent ones. I want to play the Samus Returns on 3DS, and then I want to play Dread. And when I finish up those two, then I'll be open to playing other Metroidvanias. And Hollow Knight will probably be one of the earlier ones I try, because I know that's a really popular one. So we'll see what happens. I might get there next year or something, maybe 2 years from now. It might be a while, so we'll see what happens. Honestly, I can't say much, but I do know that a lot of people are very happy with Silksong. Honestly, though, I feel like I've heard a little bit less of it than I expected to. Like, I go on these, on the websites where I read, like, articles and stuff, and it's like, every fourth or fifth article is about Silksong. Whereas I would have expected, every article or every other article to be about Silksong. So I don't think it's been quite as big a buzz as, I expected it to be. Or honestly, I feel like there was more talk about Silksong before it came out than there has been since it came out. It's not to say nobody's talking about it. Lots of people still are. But like I said, it's just not quite as overwhelming as I expected. But it could just be because I'm so busy recently. And it also could be just because I've been off Blue Sky for a long time. And honestly, I'm just really not on most of the social media places anymore. I'm kind of on YouTube, and that's really it. Like, I don't really go to a lot of these other places. I hear, my news and stuff. I hear that, like, actually from articles. I read stuff. I don't necessarily, like, do a whole lot of social media these days. So I'm sure I'll get back into it, but it's a bit of a weird situation. So that could be why, or maybe there's literally just less people talking about Silksong, but I still think a lot of people are. So it's a moot point. It's a moot point at the end of the day. So Silksong, that came out. I'll probably be playing that at some point, but not this year. It'll probably be a later on thing. I do think Silksong has a good chance of getting a GOTY nominee at the Game Awards. I don't think it's gonna win, but I think it could be a nominee for sure. Obviously Bonanza's gonna win, right? No, I don't think Bonanza's gonna win, but I wish it would. I wish it would. That'd be great. But anyway, so I have not played any Bonanza, you might be wondering. I have not played any Bonanza in the last 2 weeks. After I beat it, I kind of put it up, and I was like, alright, I'm going to come back to this and 100% it, but at that point, Kirby was coming out in just a few days. So I was like, alright, I'm going to wait, and I'm going to play Kirby when that comes out, and then I'll kind of play both of them at the same time. And so I can hopefully finish up both of them before the end of the month. That's my plan. Even with how busy I've been, I still would like to finish up both Kirby and Donkey Kong Bonanza before the end of the month, and that means 100%ing. Because for Kirby and the Forgotten Land, I haven't really talked about Kirby yet, and I'm going to now, if you can't tell with the way I'm going on this. Kirby and the Forgotten Land has 6 main worlds, and I guess actually I should clarify. Most people that are talking about Kirby and the Forgotten Land right now are talking about it because of the Starcross World Switch 2 edition, right? Because it just came out on Switch 2. Obviously, the game's been out a few years now on Switch 1. But it's just came out on Switch 2, and the Switch 2 version of the Switch 2 edition of the game, I should say, the thing that they added on top of that was the Star-Crossed World. And the Star-Crossed World is the equivalent of 2 extra worlds from what I've read online. And so then there's also a post-game world that was in the original game. So in the original game, there were 6 worlds plus a post-game world, and now there are 2 additional worlds worth of levels. So basically, there's 9 worlds. I'm in the 6th world, so I've almost beaten the main game. Once I beat the main game, I'm going to go do the post-game world, and I'm going to do the Starcross worlds, both of them. And then after that, I'm going to go back and work on 100%ing it. Now, I'm not going to just play Kirby. I'm going to go back to Donkey Kong Bonanza over the next couple of weeks as well. And maybe even Yakuza 0. We'll see what happens. But I'd like to, I've been basically just playing Kirby since it came out. And so I'd like to kind of switch things up again. I've been busy. And this podcast episode is coming out a little later today because I've been so busy. And so that's going to continue to be the case for another month and a half or so. But then things will calm down a little bit more, I think, so. I was getting a little worried there. I was like, man, am I going to have enough stuff at the end of the year to, like, have a good list? But I'm at, like, 35 games, and it's September, so I imagine I'll at least hit 40, and I feel like 40 is plenty good a list. Honestly, even the 30 would probably be enough. I feel like if I had less than 30, the list wouldn't be all that good. But with, around 40, I think that's a phenomenal list. So I'm definitely not too concerned about that anymore. Yeah, Kirby and the Forgotten Land. So, I had heard some people talk about before, like, I'd heard mixed opinions on Kirby and the Forgotten Land. And I've got to say, I've got a unique opinion here and unique position on Kirby, or at least I'm coming at it from a unique perspective, anyways, because I played my first Kirby game. I was first exposed to a Kirby game, or at least like I played one last year, back in March or April or something. I played Kirby's Adventure on NES. At the time, I had the Switch Online expansion pack, but I didn't have the. Or sorry, I had the Switch Online membership, but I didn't have the expansion pack. And so I played through Kirby's Adventure back then. It's been, well over a year now, almost a year and a half, I think. So that was quite a while ago, but then, of course, in 2024, I went on to play all three Kirby's Dream Land games. So there was, the two Game Boy ones and the Super Nintendo one. I wasn't a huge fan of Kirby's Dream Land 1 and 2. They're fine. Like, they're pretty good. I almost think Kirby's Dream Land 2 might have been in my top 50. So actually, I think Kirby's Dream Land 2 is actually a pretty decent 2D platformer, I should say. Kirby's Dream Land 1 isn't great. Kirby's Dream Land 1 is not fantastic. It's fine-ish. I mean, I think you probably ought to play it because it's the first Kirby game, right? That's the only reason to play it. Number one, it's the first Kirby game, and I guess there is actually a second reason. That's that the game's very short. So it's the first Kirby game, and it's a very short game, so there's kind of some novelty to it. So it's worth playing, I think, but it's not, like, all that great. And so if you're somebody who just wants to, like, really get into a series with one of the best games in the series, I don't think Kirby's Dream Land is one of the ones. But if you're somebody who wants to start from the beginning and work your way up, then obviously Kirby's Dream Land is the first Kirby game. And if you're someone who just plays 2D platformers, I think it's worth giving Kirby a try. I know, there's kind of a stigma against Kirby games, and oh, they're so easy and all this stuff. And yes, I agree they are quite easy, but I don't know. I still think you can have a lot of fun with a 2D platformer, even if it's not particularly difficult. I don't think difficulty like makes fun in a platformer. I mean, it can, right? There's instances for sure, but it's not completely necessary. So anyways, so that was my experience, and then I played earlier this year, back in February, I played Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards, and that was actually, I think that's my second favorite Kirby game. So Kirby's Adventure is my favorite, Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards is my second favorite, and my third favorite is probably Kirby's Dream Land 3. And so, of course, this is now my, I don't know, sixth Kirby game. But I guess my point is, I've played the Dreamland games, I've played Adventure, I've played Kirby 64, so there's a big gap there between this Kirby game and the next most recent one that I've played. That's just like 20 years. So it's a little strange. I'm coming at it from a weird perspective because I've only played the old Kirby games. For those who are wondering, I did start Kirby and the Amazing Mirror on Game Boy Advance. I didn't get too far. I kind of got sidetracked with some other stuff, and I do still plan to come back, but Kirby and the Amazing Mirror is kind of a weird game. It's not, I don't think it's a very normal Kirby game. It is some weird stuff about it, so I'll probably end up playing it at some point, and then maybe I'll move on to like Squeak Squad or something. Kirby's Epic Yarn. I honestly, I probably want to play all the mainline Kirby games, like all the main 2D ones. I was gonna say and 3D ones, but there's only one 3D one. That's Forgotten Land. But anyway, so, that was my position with Kirby, is that I'd only played the old ones, and now I'm jumping right into, I think the most recent, or maybe the second most recent of the main series. It's one of the more recent ones for sure. It's quite recent, a game. And so jumping right into a modern Kirby game, it was fantastic. I thought it was going to be a little jarring. I was a little concerned that a modern Kirby game would be, so easy that it would be not fun. And I agree, it is very easy. I don't think I've died, and I'm almost done with the game. I still don't think I've died. Yeah, I don't think I've died at all, actually. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I haven't died. But anyway, so it's not difficult by any means. But I think, with Kirby, there's a few types of 2D platformers. There's the Donkey Kong Country style, and a lot of the fun in Donkey Kong Country is the reward of getting through a level with complex jumps and with enemies and, all this stuff. It can get pretty tough, obviously. If anybody who's played the Donkey Kong Country games will know, the games can get pretty tough. It doesn't mean they're tough the whole way through, but they can get pretty tough. And most of the time, the difficulty, I think, is appreciated, because I think they do it in a good way. Now, I don't think Donkey Kong Country 2 does it in a particularly good way. That's why I don't like that one, but I like the other four. So, and I mean, I will say Donkey Kong Country 2 is still a decent game, it's just not as good as the other ones. And I know that's kind of a unpopular opinion, so if you disagree, that's fine. Email the show, right? But anyways, so that's kind of where I come from on Donkey Kong Country. But then you have a game like Mario, right? Like a 2D Mario game, and usually a 2D Mario game does have some tricky sections, right? There's always that like post game stuff, and that the post game stuff on 2D Mario games can be pretty tricky sometimes, right? Or in like Super Mario Brothers Wonder, right? There was the final. After the final level, there's like the final level, and then like the final level. There's the badge challenge there at the end. And the badge challenge, I know I read a lot on social media, like all these people that were like, oh my gosh, this took me like 5 hours or 6 hours, 10 hours even, right? Now, I think for me, it was maybe about 2 or 3. A level that if you do it right the first time through, you can finish it in like 10 minutes. It's a long level, but it's nowhere near, nowhere near the 10 hours some people spent on it. Now, I happen to be pretty good at 2D platformers, so like I said, it only took me 2 or 3 hours, but that's still a lot longer than any other level in that game took me. So stuff like that does have challenge, right? Kirby, so far, and having played the older ones, and now having almost finished the main game in Forgotten Land, and maybe there'll be some stuff later, but at least having played some of the older 2D platforming Kirbys, they're not very difficult. I would say on average they're easier than a Mario game, and they don't have that extra, like, super difficult challenge, usually. And that's fine. I don't need there to be, right? And in Kirby and the Forgotten Land, my enjoyment of the game is mostly because of the collectibles. I've been getting the collectibles, I've been exploring the levels, and the older games, the 2D ones that I played, obviously you couldn't really explore so much. Now, I will say in Kirby 64, they did a pretty good job. There were some collectibles around. There were those, like, the crystal shards, like, you could collect crystal shards, and that was cool. I didn't really do a whole lot of that. I was totally fine running through the level. But with each Kirby game, there was something that kind of kept me engaged, With the Dreamland games, in the second and third one, they introduced, like, animal companions, and those are kind of neat. With Kirby's Adventure, I think that one's kind of unique because the level design is just so good, right? It's just, honestly, I think it's just really well-made levels, and I think that was kind of enough. And it also helped that it was my first Kirby game, so maybe I ought to return to it at some point and kind of give it a more critical look, and maybe, I don't know, maybe it won't be my favorite one anymore. I'm not sure. I think it probably will still be, though. It was really good. But anyways, so all those games kind of had something cool about them. And like I said, Kirby 64, obviously part of the appeal is that it's in 3D, kind of. It's in like 2.5D, right? So you're a 3D model, but you're moving in a 2D space. That's kind of how it works. And there's the collectibles, and that's cool as well. I will say the bosses in Kirby 64 were quite engaging, and most of them were fun. There were a couple that were a little annoying. Like, they were... Weird thing about Kirby 64, the levels were very easy, like most Kirby games, but the bosses I found to be quite difficult. So I'm not sure why that was. It just felt like there was a weird difficulty discrepancy. And if you're someone who's not particularly good at 2D platformers, or you like your platformers very easy and you like other Kirby games, maybe you'll actually have a problem with Kirby 64 because the bosses jump up so much in difficulty. Like, you'll be playing through these levels and they're like, oh yeah, piece of cake, whatever, no big deal. I will say it's not quite like Forgotten Land. Like, I did die a few times in Kirby 64. It's not quite that bad, but not many, like once or twice, Whereas with the bosses, each boss I would die a few times, pretty much. Not the first couple, but, later on in the game, I'd die a few times. I think I actually got stuck on 2 of the bosses for a little while. Not, like, so long that it was obnoxious, but, like, I had to do one boss. I think it was, the shark boss. I had to do that boss. Like, it took me, like, an hour to beat. Like, so, like, it's weird, some of those, later bosses in that game. But anyways, I kind of got off topic there, but, that's why you listen to this podcast, right? But my point is Kirby and the Forgotten Land, I think the level design is quite cool. Obviously, it's unique because it's 3D. It's a 3D platformer, and it's not like a Mario 3D platformer. I guess it's kind of like 3D Land or 3D World, and it's not like Bonanza. It's not like a lot of these other games. It's more of a I guess in a way it actually does give off some Astrobot vibes, I've noticed. But in Astrobot, there's super open areas, and there's more tight level-based areas. So it's interesting, 3D platformers, there's a lot of different varieties of them. A game like Odyssey, right, it's all open. Well, except for the sub areas, right? There's sub areas; those are tight platforming challenges. And in a game like Bonanza, it's kind of the same thing, right? It's like super open, but then there's tight platforming challenges. Um, and then there's a game like, Super Mario Galaxy, which is not very open, and it's mostly tight platforming challenges. But then you have 3D Land or 3D World, which is literally just 3D platforming or tight platforming challenges. Or they're not all tight, but they're not all, but they're not open levels either. They're like very, very locked down. And so I think Kirby and the Forgotten Land, I don't think it's quite as bad as like, well, no, actually, I do think it is. I think it's just as locked down as 3D Land and 3D World. Um, or as much as like the sub levels from Mario Odyssey or Astrobot or Bonanza or something like that, right? It's just as locked down as some of those things, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, right? Because you do still have to explore around because there's all sorts of different collectibles and stuff. Mainly how the collectibles work in Kirby and the Forgotten Land, at least the ones I've engaged with so far. Because who knows, maybe there's something after the game that I don't know about. There's the collectibles in the levels, which are all Waddle Dees. So there's these Waddle Dees that you have to save from each level. That's like the whole premise of the game. You got to save the Waddle Dees. Spoilers, right? I know, crazy. You guys all hate me now. Oh wow. But anyways, so there's the Waddle Dees. There's like a varying amount in each level. I think it's anywhere from like 6 to 10 or so, 11 even. I think I saw in one level. So somewhere in that area. I feel like it's usually about 8 or 9. And 3 of them you get just for beating the level. For most levels, you get 3 or 4, potentially 5, I think. Just like you find them somewhere in the level. They'll be in a cage somewhere. And oftentimes you have to solve some sort of puzzle, or you have to find something that you normally wouldn't see to find that cage and get that extra Waddle Dee. And then the last few objectives, there's like a few objectives that you have to do like while you're playing the level, and you don't know them going in, so you just kind of have to guess. You just have to do a lot of stuff in the level and do a lot of exploration and kind of hope that you manage to find the right thing to get the Waddle Dees. And I guess you could find that annoying, and to an extent, I guess it's a little annoying. But I wanted to replay these levels anyway. I mean, these levels are well made, I think, so I don't think it bothers me too much. That I'm going to have to go back to the levels and stuff if I want 100%. Because at the end of the day, that's what 100%ing is, right? Generally speaking, when you're 100%ing something, you are just going back to levels, right? It's not often that you get everything on the first time through. And I was in the first few levels of this game. I was trying to get every possible thing the first time through, or if I finished a level and I missed something, I just go right back in, right? But I don't think that's the way to play it. I think what you ought to do, and what I've started doing, is starting in like the second world, is just go through the levels. Be inquisitive, be explorative, right? Explore these things, take your time while you're going through the levels. But then once you beat the game, then you can go back if you want to and be even more thorough about your exploration. And the good news is, you don't have to be too thorough that first time around because most of the objectives will unlock after you beat the level. Now, if there's like 4 or 5 of them, if you found out 3 or 4 of the objectives, they'll give you the last one. But if you only have found out like 2 or 3 of the objectives, they might only give you 1 out of the other 2 or 3. They might not necessarily give you everything. So there's a chance you might have to play a level over like 3 times or something if you want to do 100%. But it's obviously going to vary level to level based on how hard the collectibles are. And I found many things to be pretty easy to find, right? But other things aren't. And so it definitely there's a good balance with each level. There'll be like, well, so how would you ever figure that out without a hint, right? But other things, it's like you could pretty easily figure that out just by, happening to stumble across it. So there's a good balance, there's a good mix of stuff, and like I said, the levels design is great, and it does kind of just feel nice playing a modern Kirby game. I will say, considering how Kirby 64 was my most recent Kirby game that I beat, I did actually kind of miss the double, copy ability mechanic. So for those who don't know, in most Kirby games, it wasn't in the first couple, I don't believe. But yeah, it wasn't in Kirby's Dream Land. I almost don't think it was in Adventure, but I could be wrong. I'm not sure. I know it was there by Dreamland 3. Actually, I don't know that. I don't know. I don't know when the copy ability started, but it was there in some of the older ones. There's the Kirby's famous copy ability, which is in all of the newer games, but it came about a few games in. You can swallow an enemy and then you get their ability, right? Well, you can choose. Sometimes you can just choose to spit them out or something instead, but you can get their ability if you'd like. And so And sometimes you need those abilities to get collectibles, or they're very helpful for getting through the level, helpful for fighting bosses and stuff. But in Kirby and the Forgotten Land, or actually, sorry, not in Kirby and the Forgotten Land, in Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards, you could actually get a second ability, and your abilities could stack. So sometimes you would swallow, like, a fire guy, and then you could, like, turn into a ball of fire, right? But then you would take out that ability, and you'd throw it at, say, a boomerang guy, and now you could throw a fiery boomerang, right? Or if, you would swallowed an electric guy, right? And now you swallow a sword guy, well, your sword's going to have electric powers, right? It's pretty simple stuff, but it gave a lot more combinations and a lot more possibilities as to your copy abilities and stuff. And I think that was pretty welcome in Kirby 64. And it's kind of a shame that that was kind of like a one-time thing. That was a gimmick for one game. I think it's kind of a thing that they could definitely go back to again if they so wanted to. But they don't. So yes, that's Kirby in the Forgotten Land. I will say that the levels and stuff, the theming of the worlds is pretty generic. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, right? But like you had grass, you had like snow, you had fight like lava area. There were a couple that were a little bit less generic. There was one that was like kind of like a carnival. It wasn't anything too crazy though, and I wasn't expecting it to be either. It's more about the level design, and then of course the collectibles and the challenges within the levels. It's not so much about the theming of the game. Um, Also, a big mechanic in Kirby and the Forgotten Land, this is potentially its biggest gimmick besides just being 3D, is the mouthful mode. So, there's Kirby's copy abilities, but you can also swallow things like cars, or there's like these storage lockers, or there's these like rolling carts. And when you swallow these things, like Kirby, like his mouth goes all the way around and he kind of like becomes the object, and then you can move the object. There's also like a staircase you can sometimes take over. And so that right at the beginning of the game, you take over a car, and now you have the ability to drive around, and you can boost and move faster. And so there's some levels in the game where you're literally driving in a car, and you're like, it's like a race level, right? You got to drive as fast as possible. There's levels in the game where you have to stop what you're doing and control a staircase and move it into place so you can get up to a platform, right? There's like a lot of that, a lot of those little things. Or sometimes there'll be like a collectible that you can only reach with a mouthful mode thing. There's also, you can take over a vending machine and shoot cans out. Like, there's a lot of just weird, zany stuff. It's very fun, a lot of this stuff is really, got a good laugh out of me most of the time, the first time I saw it. I'm like, when I took over a car, I was like, what? Like what just happened? Like, this is ridiculous. And so, that kind of stuff I definitely do appreciate. I think more and more, the more games I play, every time there's something that's just obnoxious and crazy, I appreciate it more and more every time. I like the zaniness, so... Anyways, but, in Kirby and the Forgotten Land, it's definitely not light on the zaniness. It's great. The story is light, as with many Nintendo games. Not all, but many Nintendo games. And I don't mind. I usually don't care too much about story, so I'm a true-bred Nintendo fan. But anyway, so yeah, there's the levels and stuff. There's also, I guess, also interesting to note about Kirby and the Forgotten Land. I'm talking about this. A lot of you guys have probably played the game, but if you haven't, that's kind of why I'm here. But there's a hub world in Kirby and the Forgotten Land. It's called Waddle Dee Town. And basically the premise is, you save all these Waddle Dees from the levels, but then when you do, they go back to the town. And when they're there, the more you get, the more stuff they build. I think it's actually, that kind of happens in Astro Bot a little bit too. It happens in a lot of games, but it's not unique to any one game. But this has the same idea. So, when you capture, 50 Waddle Dees, you get a new building, or you get 60 and you get a new building, or 80, or whatever. Obviously the numbers go up. And so there were a few things, like there was one that they opened like an item shop, and you can like buy like a full health upgrade or something there. There's things that you can, like, the copy abilities can get leveled up if you find the right collectibles in a level. And so you can, you might be able to, roll up into a spiky ball, but then you level it up, and now it's bigger, and it's, you're rolling around with pencils. I don't know, like there's things like that, and so it changes the appearance, and it changes the function, or it amplifies the function of the copy ability. So that was a pretty cool mechanic. There's also one that opened up. It was a cafe, and there you can buy food to take to levels that can, give you some health back. But the main thing is there's a mini game attached to it. And so there was a cool mini game where, it's like a and there's a lot of games like this. I can't even think of one in particular, but you're standing there at a counter, and a guy will come up, and you've got to serve him whatever he wants. And so the idea is, it keeps going faster as the game progresses, and so you'll be sitting there, and there's like, I don't know, a hamburger and I don't know, some French fries, right? And this guy will want French fries, but the next guy will want a hamburger, and you got to go back and forth and super fast, and you've only got so much time, and if you get it wrong, you lose some time, and so there's that kind of stuff. But also that they got like 4 different difficulty levels of it, and every difficulty level there's less time to do each order, but there's also more things that could be ordered. So it gets pretty complex pretty fast. So that was cool. I guess this is a good time to mention the trophies, right? So there's a like a gacha machine that opens up pretty early in the game, and there's actually 3 of them total, I believe. There's a spot where they're in a corner of the town, and I've unlocked my 3rd gacha machine, and it seems like it's full now. So I don't think there's going to be another one, but I could be wrong. But yeah, so there's like 3 gacha machines. Each of them have a different library of possible figures you can pull. You pull out these like statues that you can see in a menu. Kind of like a Smash Brothers trophy menu. It's kind of like that. Obviously, HAL Laboratory have history with Smash Brothers, so that's kind of I'm sure that kind of has something to do with why there are trophies in the game. But anyways, and so most of these trophies you get by turning the crank on the gacha machine, and you pay some of your coins you collect throughout the game to get them. And so I did a bunch of that earlier on, but then there's also some that are locked behind like leveling up a copy ability, and when you do that, now they're added to the gacha machine, right? But there's also some that you have to have like specific things that you have to do. So there's some that you have to put in a code. There's a place that you put in like gift codes that were sent out on the Nintendo website, and you've got to look them up now. So there's places like that. There's one where you have to beat the restaurant minigame that I was just talking about, and if you beat that at the highest difficulty, you get a trophy. There's one where you have to go to a battle arena, and you have to work your way up and fight a bunch of bosses you've already fought, like again, like in a boss rush kind of mode, and if you do that, you get a trophy. So there's all those kind of things, and there's quite a few of them. There's one you got to fish, there's a fishing mechanic, so there's a lot of cool little mini games, and Kirby games have been known to have their cool mini games, obviously ever since like Kirby Superstar on the Super Nintendo. Ever since then, oh, that's the other Kirby game I played. Earlier when I listed all the Kirby games I've played, I left that one off. I forgot. But anyways, so Kirby games have always been good about their mini games, and Forgotten Land is no exception. And I do like that there's actually like a really good reason to do most of these mini games, for the trophy, because I'm getting all the collectibles and the levels, but I'm also going for all the trophies. So I'm gonna try to totally 100% this game, unless I find out there's some other thing I've got to do that's stupid. So we'll see what happens. But I think I'm gonna actually 100% this one, like totally, which was pretty cool. Now I probably should have done my due diligence. Geez, I just drank like ice cold water and now I can't talk. Probably should have done my due diligence and went ahead and played some of the Starcross World levels so I could talk about those on the show as well, because that is kind of like the main thing about the Switch 2 version of the game, since the main game has already been out for a little while. But, I did not do that, so I don't have anything to talk about with those. But I will play those for next time, or at least I'll, start that for next time. I imagine I'll at least beat the game, probably today, honestly. Like, probably within an hour or two of you hearing this podcast episode, if you're watching it on the day it came out, I'll probably have beat the game. Because like I said, I'm only like 2 levels away. But besides that, there's going to be all the post-game stuff. There's going to be the post-game world and the 2 Switch 2 like exclusive worlds. So I got to beat all those. And then I got to go back and do the collectibles. So I'm going to say I probably won't have 100%ed it next time. Well, maybe. There's a chance. But I may have, I may not have. And I also have gone back to Donkey Kong Bonanza. So I guess there's a very small chance that if I manage to like go really fast on these, I could potentially next episode have 100% of both games. But I'm going to guess probably not. But I'll definitely have beaten Kirby, and I'll probably have a lot more to talk about in regards to Kirby next time. So stay tuned for all that kind of stuff. That'll be fun. Alright, so we're going to take a quick musical break, and we're going to come back, and I'm going to talk about some more news. I know I kind of already touched on a little bit of that stuff at the top of the show, but we're going to come back and do some more of that. So that'll be exciting. And like I said, this probably will be a slightly shorter show today because, like I said, I've been busy lately. I haven't had a lot of time to play games. but I also don't have a lot of time to make this episode, so I really have to kind of get moving here because this episode is already coming out a little bit late. I don't want it to be any more late. Alright, so Square Enix. This was, I think, last week. This is being reported on by The Gamer. So there was a interview conducted by, oh gosh, Inverse. That's right, Inverse did this interview. They did it with Kazutoyo Mahiro. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I've heard the name before, but I can't remember how it's said. So bear with me here. But he's the guy who originally directed Final Fantasy Tactics, and as you know, or as you may know, I hope you know, or I guess it doesn't really matter to me if you know, but you may know, Final Fantasy Tactics, The Evilist Chronicles, that's the remake of Final Fantasy Tactics, that's coming out this month, September 30th, I believe, so, actually, yeah, I'm 100% sure, it's September 30th, so the last day of the month that's coming out. I'm kind of interested in the game, I don't think I'm going to pick it up day one or anything, but I am at least considering playing it like next year or something, right? I could maybe get around to it. So obviously it's a Final Fantasy game, but it's a tactics, like a strategy-based one, like a Fire Emblem or like a Advance Wars or something like that. So it's not like turn-based well, it is kind of, I guess it is turn-based, but it's not the turn-based combat you're probably used to with other Final Fantasy games. Like the older ones, you know. So anyways, so that's kind of what we're talking about with that stuff. But yeah, so Final Fantasy Tactics, The Evilist Chronicles, that's coming out this month. And of course, it was an interview. You know, there's been a lot of interviews, but this particular one that we're talking about here, they were talking about a lot of things, but they kind of brought up the idea of, you know, what's next if this does well. And so Kazutoyo Mahiro says, I don't know if, I think this is an actual quote. So he says, if the Evilist Chronicles can do well, that's good for the fans, they can enjoy it. But at the same time, it shows the business viability of the strategy RPG genre. So that could potentially open the door for something with Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, or A2, or maybe even sequels and new titles as well. So obviously the implication here, actually not even the implication, literally he's saying that if this thing does well, if it sells well, then they can, you know, make another one, or they can, you know, make a sequel to the original one, or they can potentially, you know, put out a Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. You know, that was another Final Fantasy Tactics game. They could remake that one as well. So obviously, you know, this is an important thing, right? Because so if anybody cares about tactics RPGs, I say you should probably buy this game. I'm not somebody who does specifically, so I'm not bothered. But if you're somebody who like really likes tactics RPGs, this is probably the game for you. Because first of all, a lot of people like it, right? It's widely respected in tactics RPGs. But on top of that, this could have big meaning, right? If this game sells really well, as they're saying, and you know, Mahiro didn't even have to say this. Obviously, this is expected, but it's at least cool to hear it from him, you know, directly. Obviously, if this thing does well, they'll do another one, or they'll do something similar, or somebody will do something similar, right? Because it proves that there's viability in the business. So that's pretty cool, at least, to hear that, you know, these things, they are listening, right? And at least Square Enix, you know, they're one of the better ones, I think. Generally, you know, you'll hear a lot about this stuff. There's more. We're going to talk about them again later as well. But there's a lot of that stuff. You know, they quite frequently have interviews and stuff where they kind of give some insight on what's going on. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Still on the topic of Square Enix, Octopath Traveler 0. So I don't really have much to say about the game. But I did read, and apparently this is some leaks and rumors that are coming out about Octopath Traveler 0. So for those who don't know, Octopath Traveler 0 is a prequel to Octopath Traveler that was originally released on the Switch back in 2018, I think? Maybe 17, I'm actually not entirely sure on that, but it was in that range. But Octopath Traveler came out then, and then Octopath Traveler 2 came out in 2022. Personally, I have the second one, and I've played the first little bit of it, and I kind of got away from it. I guess part of the I was not totally into it, but it also is super long, so I was a little intimidated by it. And supposedly, Octopath Traveler 0 is going to be 100 hours long for the main story, which is crazy. There's not a ton of games out there that are 100 hours long. There's a few for sure, but 100-hour games are pretty intimidating as it turns out. So that's interesting. I was honestly kind of interested in this game because I kind of wanted to get into Octopath, and now hearing it's 100 hours, I'm like, yeah, I don't know about that one. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But yeah, I know a lot of people have been talking about a potential Octopath Traveler 3 and how that would be a cool thing for a lot of people. And so instead having a prequel, I guess it's a little surprising. For those who don't know, this is like the content in Octopath Traveler 0 is going to be part of it, loosely based on the mobile game that got discontinued, and that was a gacha game. And so I think they're going to be taking some of that stuff and kind of, morphing it into like a real game. It's like a proper like prequel. So that's exciting for Octopath people or just for RPG people in general. Another Square Enix thing. Square Enix is like literally carrying the Switch too. Okay, we got Square Enix and Sega. Between the two of them, they're just like putting out every third-party game on the platform. And speaking of Sega, we had Shinobi Art of Vengeance come out last week. It actually came out on a Friday, I believe. It was the 29th of August, like the day after Kirby, I believe. No, I know. I keep saying I believe for things that I know. This one, I'm sure of this one. So, so for Shinobi, for those who don't know, Shinobi back on the Genesis, there were a few games, and I would describe Shinobi as similar to Ninja Gaiden. If anybody's ever played Ninja Gaiden, obviously they're both ninjas, so that's one thing. But they're also like action platformer brawlers, right? Um, on some level, they could almost be sort of compared to like beat 'em ups, but with platforming. So I guess they're really just they're proper 2D action adventure platformers that we don't really have anymore. Those are the kinds of games like the majority of games back on like Super Nintendo and NES and stuff were those kinds of games, and they're kind of pretty much gone now. They don't really exist too much anymore. The only ones that do exist are ones from long-standing IPs that have existed since then, obviously like Shinobi. And I guess even something like Metroid, right? Metroid was originally just one of those, or Castlevania was originally just one of those, and both of those kind of went their own direction. And so, back then, something like Ninja Gaiden and Mario weren't too far apart, right? And so I think it's not necessarily that we've lost the action adventure genre, it's just that things have diversified so much because new technologies have allowed for, more diverse games, right? So Metroidvanias kind of came out of these kind of games. Platformers kind of came out of these kind of games. You could argue they were earlier, but I think they were kind of at the time one and the same, and now platformers have emerged as a totally separate thing. Um, and this is true for a lot of like beat 'em ups even, right? So it's true for a lot of these things. So this is just another example. But in this instance, we actually have kind of like the original, not maybe the original, but one of the earlier, um, things in that genre that no longer really exists. So that's what Shinobi is basically. But yeah, it's like a action platformer, and it's a lot like Ninja Gaiden. There was a Ninja Gaiden came out earlier this year, Ninja Gaiden Ragebound. I believe it came out in May. I could be wrong about that, but Ninja Gaiden Ragebound was kind of the reason I didn't buy that because I was kind of thinking about buying that. Well, first of all, I want to buy the other 2D Ninja Gaiden games before I play Ragebound because Ragebound seems like a really cool game. I don't think I really talked about it back then when it was coming out because I didn't really have quite the same interest back then. It came out in July. So actually, that was pretty recent. That was actually more recent than I thought. I thought it was back in like May time, but no, it was July. So that just came out like a little over a month ago. It was July 31st. So yeah, July or Ninja Gaiden Ragebound and Shinobi Art of Vengeance are both very similar games. So it's kind of interesting that those both came out only like a month apart, and they're very similar to each other. So that's Shinobi. There was a history of Shinobi back on the Genesis, and it's been pretty dormant since. I know that think there was a game or two on like the PS1 maybe, but it's not been particularly active until this game. It's kind of bringing things back, supposedly. So I definitely want to play Shinobi Art of Vengeance if I play the other Shinobis, and I definitely want to play Ninja Gaiden Ragebound if I play the other Ninja Gaidens. I did try to play through the original Ninja Gaiden, and I know a lot of people talk about how hard Ninja Gaiden is on NES, and I agree, because I played through the entire game up until the final boss, and I didn't think it was that bad. Now, I was using save states, but I wasn't, like, rewinding. And I played up through the entire game until the final boss, and then I was no longer able to progress. I could not beat the final boss. I tried for hours and hours and hours. I tried with save states. I tried with rewind. I tried with everything. I could not, for the life of me, beat the final boss of Ninja Gaiden. So I don't know if I was just really bad at video games. This was a little while ago, like a couple of years ago now, so I should probably give it another shot. I don't know what the deal was, but I just could not do it. I was like, really just could not do it. So I don't know. Maybe I would be able to now. And I also tried, I think it was Shinobi 3, maybe, on Genesis, and I got about halfway through that game and kind of got away from it, and that was a fun game, too. So both of these games, I've had fun with the earlier ones, and I think a more modern version of either of these games would be way better. So I'd definitely like to play these games eventually, but I kind of wanted to just kind of bring up Shinobi Art of Vengeance. I actually pulled up an article here, not to read anything off it or anything, just to remind me to talk about the game, because I hadn't mentioned it in the earlier part of the show. Alright, so Ubisoft, they had their 30th anniversary for Rayman. So obviously Rayman was around back on the PS1. There was a 2D platforming Rayman back in the day, just called Rayman on the PS1. And that was a very difficult platformer. And then they made a second Rayman, and that was a 3D platformer. That was on PlayStation 1, and I think that was on 64 as well. And then there was one on PS2 and GameCube and stuff. So there have been a few Rayman games over the years. He used to be just 2D. The original game was 2D. Then he became a 3D mascot. And then, of course, they brought Rayman back, way, way later for Rayman Origins on, like, the 360 and stuff. And then there was Rayman Legends, which is probably the most well-known Rayman game. And that came out, at this point, gosh, like 10 years ago, right? I mean, it's a pretty old game at this point. And Rayman Legends is a great game. It's fantastic. I think it was just outside of my top 10 in my last top 50 list. I want to say it was like 12 or 13. Like, it was really high up there. It's another one of my favorite 2D platformers. So I'm a fan of Rayman Legends. I want to play Rayman Origins, even though most of the Origins levels are in Legends. They're not all there. And it would be cool at least to play through those levels again with the original context. So I do kind of want to play through Origins at some point, but it's not quite as popular a game. And I might even play through some of the older ones at some point. We'll see what happens. But anyways, my point is, they were talking about Rayman's 30th anniversary, which is funny because Rayman is, like, totally dormant right now. There's no no Rayman games coming out anymore. But they put out some concept art from Rayman Legends. Or I don't know if it's Rayman Legends or just Rayman in general. Maybe they're making a new game. I don't think they're making a new game. Yeah, Rayman Legends. Oh, 2013 Rayman Legends came out. Okay. So yeah, 12 years ago. But yeah, so this is concept art from Rayman Legends. They put out a few pieces of concept art to start their 30th anniversary, supposedly. So potentially they might do some more stuff for the anniversary. That'd be really cool if they put out some of the old Rayman games, anew. Or if potentially they put out, they remade the original Rayman game with modern physics, or if they maybe put out the 64 version of Rayman 2 on Switch Online. That would be cool, right? I doubt that would ever happen, but I guess the point is maybe we'll see a Rayman release sometime soon, because Rayman has been dormant for a long time, and I think, a lot of people do like the Rayman games, or at least Legends, and would definitely love to see more of that stuff, and I'm one of those people. I'm definitely one of those people. What they say, Rayman for Smash. Anyway, so back to Square Enix. We had a little break from Square Enix, and they're back. So Dragon Quest 1 and 2, the HD 2D remake, that's coming out next month in October. I actually can't remember the day. I suck. I should know these things. I should have them written down somewhere. Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D remake, that is coming out on October the 30th. October 30th. So, a month exactly after Final Fantasy Tactics. So yes, Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D remake. There were Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D remake came out last year, also in October. Maybe I think it was October. And so now they're putting out 1 and 2. And if those who don't know, Dragon Quest 3 does take place earlier chronologically than 1 and 2. It's the prequel to the other two games. So that's kind of why they put them out in that order. I have not played Dragon Quest 3, but I really want to, and I'd like to do so before I play 1 and 2. So originally I was going to play 1 and 2 when it came out, because I was going to play 3 earlier. But then I was waiting for a Switch 2 version that never came, and now everyone's saying that supposedly there was a free update that made it so that Dragon Quest 3 on Switch 1 was actually a pretty good version of the game. So I'm probably going to end up buying Dragon Quest 3 on Switch 1 here soon. And then I can play Dragon Quest 1 and 2. Probably not right when it comes out. Probably next year. So I need to get onto Dragon Quest. I know I've wanted to play it forever, and now they're doing remakes, and this is a perfect opportunity for me. So I'm definitely excited about 1 and 2. But yeah, the only reason I'm bringing this up is because they dropped a trailer. It's a 7-minute long overview trailer. I watched through it. It looks pretty cool. I don't know much about Dragon Quest, to be fair, but it looks neat. So I want to give it a shot at some point for sure, because it seems like a cool idea. Alright, so Hollow Knight Silksong, we talked about this a little bit earlier. Obviously, there's going to be more to say about this game for probably the next few months, because everybody's talking about it. Hollow Knight Silksong, obviously it came out all over the world, back on September 4th, I think that came out. It's been almost a week now. And yeah, that game came out, and so I guess here's what I was getting to. It's getting review bombed in China. So everywhere else in the world, Silksong is getting rave reviews, but in China, it's getting awful reviews on Steam. And China might not seem like a big player here, but as it turns out, in the last few years, China has become huge on Steam, to the point where famously last year, China overtook the U.S. as having the most active players on Steam at one time. So China is actually really important here for game sales and stuff. Anything that's on Steam. As much as you might not seem that way, China definitely does have a big say here. So China not liking a game, that's not good. You don't want China not liking a game. So for those who are wondering what happened with Silksong, apparently the translation, the localization of Silksong into simplified Chinese is really bad. Now I don't know. As a guy who does not speak simplified Chinese, I don't know. I have nothing to say on this, but supposedly, people are saying that it's not very well translated, and so it's getting review bombed. Probably rightfully so. I think that is, if they're gonna claim that it's, playable in that language, they probably ought to take the time to go ahead and make a good version of that. So I don't know what happened, if they just, had somebody that wasn't very good with their simplified Chinese. I know I'm not. Or what exactly happened. They are still an indie studio, but at this point, Team Cherry is huge. So I think they could probably have done a better job here. So, but the Matthew Griffin, he's in charge of the publishing for Silksong. He says, "To our Chinese-speaking fans, we appreciate you letting us know about quality issues with the current simplified Chinese translation of Hollow Knight Silksong. We'll be working to improve the translation over the coming weeks. Thanks for your feedback and support." So this sounds to me like, oh shoot, we're getting bombed. We gotta do some damage control real fast. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not taking a side here. I'm not taking a stance. I'm assuming it's pretty tough to translate an English game into Mandarin, or not Mandarin, into simplified Chinese. But at the same time, it definitely does also seem like a situation where they probably could have done a little bit better. I don't know all the details here. I'm not sure. I know some people were talking about how they were bad translators, the people they hired, or the localizer wasn't very good, or they had a shady background. I don't know. So I don't know the details. I'm not trying to stir up any drama here. Not that I would be capable, but my point is, it's interesting. But I just thought that was kind of funny to me. I just found it funny. I don't even want to talk about the details. I just found it funny about how all of a sudden Chinese audience is review bombing Silksong. I think that's funny. So everybody loves Silksong except for China. Alright, back to Square Enix, because we just cannot get enough of Square Enix here on this show. It's just always Square Enix, Square Enix, Square Enix, Square Enix. Say that 3 times fast. Actually, say it 10 times fast. Anyways, Square Enix, they're back in the news. They're always in the news. We're making great progress on Kingdom Hearts 4 and Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3, they say. So there was a statement issued in a tweet, or in an X post, or whatever, I don't even know. Whatever you want to say. Nomura, he's the guy. He's the director of a lot of these games at Square Enix, of Final Fantasy VII and Kingdom Hearts 4. And so he talked about both of these games. He says, regarding Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3, Toriyama, he's also the other co-director, supposedly said that we will have news around the time of the second anniversary of Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis. We're making great progress on the game, he said. I can't say anything else, but we're indeed making a lot of progress with the game. We've already decided when we will make the announcement as well, and we will stick to that time schedule. So don't worry, please wait for it. And also, regards to Kingdom Hearts 4, says we are making great strides and we are going according to schedule. So please wait for more information on that as well. So basically, we don't have any actual info on either of the games, basically, but supposedly there's going to be a big announcement soon about Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. So that's interesting. From the sounds of things, Kingdom Hearts 4 is further out. But yeah, I actually expected not to hear about Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 for a few more years, because the first game came out in 2020, and the second game came out last year. So I figured it was going to be another 3 or 4 years, but I guess I'm forgetting that, COVID slowed a lot of these things down. So it's very entirely possible that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth could have came out in, 2022 or something, if COVID had never happened. So maybe they are truly on schedule to have another game out, in the next year or two. I don't know. But yeah, I did not expect that. I was thinking it was going to be a little bit longer than that. But yeah, I guess maybe it is just a COVID-related thing, or maybe the work's been done now with Rebirth and they don't have to worry about it. I don't know. I'm not sure what exactly happened, but it's interesting for sure. Alright, so this is some sad news here. I know everyone's going to be freaking out. This is just terrible. How could Nintendo do this to us? Nintendo has ended repair for the new 2DS XL. You cannot send in your Nintendo 2DS XL for repair any longer. I know. Everybody's waiting around. There's been all these people talking about their new 2DS XL, and they just can't get it fixed, and it's so bad, and you can't do it. You can't send it in. Can't do it. That thing, it's just not relevant. It's not relevant anymore. So obviously this was going to happen eventually. All the other 3DS models, the support was ended for those a couple of years ago. And now this is the same thing has happened with the 2DS XL. So that was the one they kept around for the longest time. It makes sense that they would stop supporting these things. Obviously, there's no reason they should want to continue getting all the parts and stuff for it, long and long after those parts are not relevant or anything. So it makes sense, right? And I mean, why would they continue to support things that are 20 years old? They're just going to need repair for it more and more often as they get older. So it makes sense, right? I'm not saying the 3DS is 20 years old. In fact, this particular model is only, 8, so that's not what I'm saying. But I'm just saying there's no reason to keep things around too long, because obviously it'll come back to bite them when they have so many that need repair because they're so old, and when they need to keep buying bad parts and stuff just to repair, really old things. So that makes sense, and I can respect that they kept the repair service around through the entire Switch 1 generation, and they waited until the Switch 2 generation. That's cool. I'm happy that they've done that. That seems like a good thing to do. Alright, so talking back to Shinobi, I actually forgot that this was one of the topics I had picked out, and so I probably should have said this back then. I should have drawn an arrow on my list here, but I did not do that, and so we're back to Shinobi Art of Vengeance. So apparently the Switch 1 version is getting a patch to improve its resolution. So for those who don't know, Nintendo, they could be a little secretive. And so when the Switch 2 before it was announced, actually, obviously there were all these rumors about dev kits and how all these studios were getting dev kits and these ones weren't getting dev kits and blah, 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 dev kits, right? On and on about dev kits. But what happened with the dev kits was basically Nintendo didn't want people finding out about the Switch 2 early. And most of the time, the leaks about consoles before they come out come from developers who got dev kits of the consoles. It's either that or it comes actually from production, right? Somewhere in China or Southeast Asia, they're producing the thing, and that's where the leak comes from. So it's usually one of those two things. With the Switch 2, it was dev kits and stuff that got out, and people saw like the entire model of the console. Like we had a picture, we had everything. Everybody knew what the thing was going to look like before it came out. And not everybody though. I say everybody who's in the know, right? Because to be fair, we say everybody, and it's not everybody, because out of the 100 million people that are probably going to end up buying the Switch 2 over the course of its life, probably only a million or two of those people ever saw the Switch 2 before it got unveiled. So the majority of people still don't care, right? But there are those crazy people like myself that did hear about these things early. And so Nintendo, because they're paranoid of people finding this stuff out, and for some reason they care so much about people not knowing anything about the Switch 2, even though it's, by no means revolutionary. I sound like a Nintendo hater here all of a sudden, like, geez. But anyways, they didn't give everybody dev kits. Not everybody who needed dev kits got dev kits, and not everybody who needed dev kits got enough dev kits. And so what happened was, no third-party games got made. And so here we are in September, and all these games are coming out on Switch 1 and not on Switch 2, for a few reasons. First of all, because there's a lower install base on Switch 2, right? Second of all, because there is such a high install base on Switch 1, and the install base on Switch 1 tends to not care too much about performance. So they can toss out a bad version of the game that'll never run very well, and people will still buy it, because there's just so many people there, and they don't care that much. So they can just, bank some money off those people. And at number 3, they didn't get dev kits to make the Switch 2 version. So they literally didn't have an opportunity to make the Switch 2 version, and they would have had to have delayed the entire game's release to have, a Switch 2 version come out, like, on day 1. So, it's definitely not ideal. Alright, Adventure of Samsara, or Samsara, or however you say it. I don't know how you say it. It's an Atari Metroidvania. So yes, Atari does still exist. Yes, they still make games every now and then. For those who don't know, Atari, they went bankrupt a few times, and all of the rights and the name were bought by a studio called Infogrames. They were French, and they rebranded their entire company to Atari, and now Infogrames has become Atari. And so Atari does still exist, kind of, but it's not the same Atari that existed back then. And so Adventures of Samsara was a Metroidvania, and it was scheduled to come out the same day as Hollow Knight Silksong. And so a lot of games were scheduled to come out the same day as Hollow Knight Silksong, and a lot of games got delayed or pushed because of Silksong. So there were lots of instances in which, there was a game coming out, but because Silksong was coming out on the same day, they decided to move the game because, obviously Silksong was going to generate so much hype that their game wouldn't get enough attention. And Atari did not do that. They figured, we're important enough, it's not a big deal. And so Adventures of Samsara has only hit 12 concurrent players on Steam, according to Video Games Chronicle. So, yeah. What about that? That's pretty embarrassing for Atari. I know, Atari has pretty much been dead for a long time, but for a game to come out from a brand as big as that's pretty embarrassing for it to only hit 12 concurrent players, Silksong or not. Speaking of concurrent players, while Adventures of Samsara had 12 concurrent players, Hollow Knight Silksong had 500,000. So, 535,213 versus 12. There's a small difference there between the two numbers. So yes, Hollow Knight Silksong obviously has done fantastic. Nobody's arguing with anything like that. I mean, it's crazy. Yeah, it's it's pretty crazy. Alright, so I think we talked about this last show. Gamescom happened, and Nintendo had to shut down the queue for Hollow Knight Silksong for the playable demo, because people that were trying to play the game at the demo were getting heat stroke because the line was so long that it had to go out the door. So Nintendo once again misjudged how well the game was going to sell, and so the Nintendo website, the online store, the Switch eShop, had to take Silksong off the store temporarily because they were getting so many error messages because everybody was trying to buy the game at one time. So And Xbox Game Pass subscribers were having similar issues to download this the game onto the console. Some people on PlayStation were struggling to find the game on the store. So basically, the game was getting delisted and relisted because so many people were buying it, and it was crashing websites. So Nintendo, PlayStation, Xbox, nobody was safe from Silksong. It launched to such roaring success that it took down websites and caused a lot of issues. So I guess I guess that's when your game is pretty important and pretty well talked about if you're crashing websites. Alright, so I think that's going to do it for today. I know this was actually a longer episode than I expected it to be. It was still shorter than most episodes as of late, but it ended up not being too terribly short. So thanks everybody for watching, for listening. I guess most of you probably aren't watching. There's not really a whole lot to watch. Speaking of stuff to watch, I did change the podcast art back to the old art. I made new art with Switch 2 Joy-Cons, and sorry about that, excuse me. Nobody liked it. Nobody liked the new art. So I made this nice new art. Nobody liked it, and so I changed the art back. So the art is the 64 logo that it was last month. It's been changed back. So enjoy the art. Screw me for spending my my precious time making a cool new art. Nobody liked it. No, but anyways, I appreciate the feedback. Thanks everybody. But yes, all right. Also, speaking of feedback, email the show with any questions, any comments, any concerns, any disagreements you might have. If you want to tell me how stupid I am for not liking Donkey Kong Country 2, feel free. Email the show at NotJustNintendo@gmail.com. That is NotJustNintendo@gmail.com. And that's going to be it from me. You can join the Discord as well. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're not already subscribed. I think that's probably gonna be it. Alright, everybody. See you in 2 weeks. And it will be 2 weeks again. I know, we've been on the 2-week schedule for a while, and we will be on the 2-week schedule at least until about November. I think in November I'm gonna go back to weekly, at least for a little bit. So, stay tuned for that. But for now, thanks everybody again, and I'll see you all next time. Adios.